I found out my wife was pregnant on a Tuesday in March. 4 days later, I found out she'd been sleeping with a friend of ours who'd been staying in our spare room for 5 months, during the exact stretch of time she would have gotten pregnant. I didn't say a single word about either thing to her for the next 6 weeks. I want to start there, because I think the order those two facts arrived in matters more than almost anything else in this story. If I'd found out about the affair first, on its own, I think I would have confronted her within the hour. Instead, I found out I was maybe going to be a father again. We'd been trying for over a year by then, and 4 days later I found out I might not be, in the one way that actually counted. I remember exactly where I was both times. The first time, in our kitchen, she came out of the bathroom holding the test with both hands, crying the good kind of crying, and I picked her up off the ground the way people do in films, and it was the happiest either of us had been in months. The second time, 4 days later, I was sitting in my car outside a hardware store, scrolling through a phone I wasn't supposed to be looking at, and I sat there for 11 minutes before I could make myself drive home. I didn't get out and confront anyone that day. I didn't confront anyone the next day either, or the one after that. I drove home, made dinner, and asked her how she was feeling, the same as I had every night since the test. She said tired. I said that was normal. Neither of those things was a lie, and neither of them was the whole truth either. Colin had been my friend for 15 years before any of this happened. College roommates, the kind of friendship that survives distance and different cities because neither of you ever really has to try that hard at it. His marriage fell apart about 8 months before all this, badly and fast, and he lost the apartment in the settlement before he'd even found a new one. I offered him our spare room without really thinking twice about it. A couple of weeks, I told him. It turned into 5 months, and I never once minded, because that's what 15 years of friendship is supposed to mean. Erin, that's what I'll call my wife, got along well with him from the start, and I was glad about that at the time, genuinely glad, because it meant our house didn't feel like it had a stranger living in it. He helped with things around the place. He was around for dinner most nights. When Erin and I were going through the harder stretches of trying for a baby, a year of appointments and negative tests, and the particular kind of tired that comes with hoping on a schedule, Colin was one of the only people who knew the full extent of it, because he was there for most of the bad days as well as the good ones. I want to be plain about something. I never once thought twice about leaving the two of them alone in the house together. Not because I'm naive, and not because I trusted blindly. I trusted specifically, based on 15 years of a particular person behaving a particular way. I know how that sounds now. I'm telling you anyway, because I think leaving that part out would make this story easier to hear and less honest to tell. The month before the positive test, things at home had felt, if anything, unusually good. Erin was in better spirits than she'd been in months. I told myself it was hope. I still think some of it probably was. I wasn't looking for anything the day I found it. Erin had asked me to grab something off her phone before she left for work, an address for a delivery, and a message thread was already open on the screen when I picked it up, because she hadn't fully closed out of it the night before. I didn't go looking. I want that on the record, not because it changes what I found, but because it's true, and I've noticed people assume otherwise when I tell this story, and I'd rather correct that than let it sit. The thread was with Colin. It didn't take more than a few lines of scrolling to understand exactly what I was looking at. It went back months, well past casual, well past anything that could be explained away as friendly. There were dates and times referenced that meant something specific. Once I did the math against the one number that mattered most, the date our doctor had used to estimate conception. The window lined up, not vaguely, precisely enough that I sat in my car outside a hardware store for 11 minutes, doing arithmetic I never wanted to be doing, on a day that had started with me picking up milk for a wife I thought I understood completely. I want to explain, as clearly as I can, why I didn't say anything that night, or the next night, or for the 6 weeks after that. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't some patient master plan I'd worked out in the car. I genuinely did not know what I wanted to do yet, and I didn't trust myself to say anything out loud until I did. There was a pregnancy in the middle of this, one I still, at that point, might be the father of, and I wasn't willing to make a decision that fast about something that permanent, no matter how much the last 4 days had just handed me a reason to. I did do one thing within the first week though, and I'll tell you honestly, it was the only clear-headed decision I made in that entire stretch. I told Colin, casually, over coffee, that Erin and I were expecting, and that we'd probably want the spare room back before too long to start setting it up as a nursery. He congratulated me. He said he understood completely, and he was out within 2 weeks, into a friend's place across town. I never told him what I knew. I never confronted him at all, in fact, not once, through any of this. Whatever reckoning eventually happened in this story, it never included him directly, and I've made my peace with that being unfinished. That same week, I opened a note on my phone and wrote one line, the only thing I let myself write down about any of it for a long time. March 14th. I know now. Nobody else does yet. I want to describe the 6 weeks that followed as honestly as I can, because I think this is the part of the story people have the hardest time believing, and the part I still have the hardest time explaining to myself. I went to the 8-week ultrasound with her. I held her hand in a dim little room while a technician moved a wand across her stomach and a heartbeat filled the speaker, fast and small and completely real, regardless of anything else that was true about that day. I cried in that room. I want to be exact about this. It wasn't performance, and it wasn't grief either, not yet. It was something I still don't have a clean word for. A heartbeat doesn't ask you who the father is before it asks you to feel something about it existing. That was a Thursday in April. By the following week, we'd told both sets of parents. Erin's mother cried on the phone. My own mother started talking about names before I'd even hung up. I let all of it happen. I answered questions about nursery colors. I said "we" a great many times that month, about a great many things, while carrying a piece of information that made the word considerably more complicated than anyone else in the conversation understood it to be. I've asked myself many times since why I didn't say anything during that stretch, and I don't think there's one honest answer, so I'm going to give you the several true ones instead of pretending there's a single clean reason. Part of it was that I genuinely didn't know, yet, whether the child was mine, and I wasn't willing to detonate everything on a guess. Part of it was that Erin, whatever she'd done, was frightened and hopeful in a way I recognized completely, because I'd spent the last year feeling exactly the same way alongside her, and some instinct in me wasn't ready to be the one who took that away from her before I had to. And part of it, the part I like least, and the part I think is probably the truest, was that I hadn't decided yet what I wanted the ending of this to look like, and some quiet, less generous part of me wanted to hold on to the only piece of leverage I had until I did. I'm not asking you to decide that was the right set of reasons. I've never fully decided that myself. At 11 weeks, on a Tuesday evening, Erin started bleeding. We were at the hospital by 7. I'm not going to describe very much of what those next few hours were like, because I don't think the details are mine to hand out, and I don't think this story needs them to make its point. By morning, it was over. She had lost the pregnancy, whoever's it had been. I held her hand through most of that night, and I want to be completely honest. The grief I felt in that hospital room was not smaller or less real because of what I knew. I had spent 6 weeks being someone's father in every way that a person can be before a child actually arrives, and that didn't switch off the moment I remembered the other thing I was carrying. I think that's the part of this story I find hardest to make sense of, even now. That both things were true in me at the exact same time, in the exact same hospital room, and neither one canceled the other out. We came home 2 days later. She was resting on the couch. I made her tea, the way I had most days for 6 weeks, and then, sitting across from her, with the loss still raw enough that neither of us had said much of anything that morning, I told her I was leaving, and that I'd known about her and Colin since the 4th of March. I said it plainly. I told her the date I'd found the messages, and I told her I'd known through every appointment, every phone call to our parents. Every night I'd held her hand and said, "we." She looked at me like I'd said something in a language she didn't recognize at first. Then she understood it completely, and I watched something in her face break in a second, separate way from the loss she was already carrying. She asked me, and I think this is the fairest question anyone has ever asked me in my life, how I could have known that whole time and let her go through the ultrasound, the names, the calls to her mother, without saying a word. She asked if I'd waited on purpose for the worst possible moment to tell her, so that I could take absolutely everything from her at once, with nothing left over to soften it. I didn't have a clean answer for her that day, and I still don't have one I'm fully proud of. I told her the truth as best I understood it in that moment, that I hadn't planned to tell her right then, specifically. I'd planned to tell her eventually, once I knew what I wanted to do, and the pregnancy ending had simply removed the one reason I'd been giving myself to keep waiting. I don't know if that's a better answer than the uglier one she was afraid of. I've turned it over more times than I can count, and I still land in a different place depending on the day. Colin found out secondhand, through a mutual friend, weeks later. He reached out to me once, a short message, mostly apology, no real explanation attached to it. I never replied. I don't think there was anything he could have written that I was ready to read yet, and I'm honestly still not certain there is. The people around us split roughly down the middle once the full story got out, which I think says something true about how genuinely uncertain this whole thing is, even to people who weren't in the room for any of it. Some friends told me, without hesitating, that Erin had it coming, and that my timing wasn't my responsibility to soften. Others told me, just as plainly, that whatever she'd done, nobody deserves to lose a pregnancy and a marriage in the same week, delivered by the same person, on purpose. I've stopped trying to convince either group they're wrong. I'm not sure either of them is, completely. The divorce itself was almost anticlimactic after all of that. There was no child to argue custody over anymore. The house sold. We split what there was to split, roughly evenly, without much of a fight in either direction, because I think we'd both already spent whatever fight we had in that one conversation on the couch. I never got a paternity test done, and at this point I never will. I was offered the chance to, in a technical sense, early on, before the pregnancy ended. There are ways to find out even before a birth. I chose not to. I've thought hard about why, and the closest I've come to an honest answer is that I didn't actually want the number. I wanted to know how I felt about a child that might be mine, not do the math on a child that definitely was or wasn't. Once the pregnancy ended, the question stopped being answerable in any way that mattered, and I've made peace, mostly, with not knowing. I live alone now, in a different apartment, in a different part of the city. Erin and I haven't spoken in over a year. I heard, through people who still talk to both of us, that she and Colin didn't end up together either, which didn't surprise me and didn't satisfy me the way I might have expected it to a year ago. I'm not going to tell you I handled this well, because I'm honestly not sure I did, and I've stopped needing to be the hero of my own story to be able to live inside it. What I know is that she broke something first, and what I know is that I chose, for 6 weeks, to carry that knowledge in silence while she didn't know I had it, and I've never fully decided which of those two facts I think mattered more in the end. I don't think this is a story with a clean side to stand on. I think it's a story about two people who each made one very large decision in the dark, at different points, for reasons that made sense to them at the time, and considerably less sense to everyone else afterward. If you've ever known something you weren't ready to say out loud, and you've wondered, since, whether the way you eventually said it was really about timing, or whether some part of you chose that moment on purpose, I'd like to hear about it. I'm not asking because I think I know the answer. I'm asking because I still don't, about my own version of this. Drop your thoughts in the comments if you made it to the end. I read every single one,